Community Television here in Cambridge, Massachusetts. We have Paul Stephen Stone with us.
Pleasure to be here, as always, Terrence.
Great having you, Paul.
A lot of fun.
We're going to be talking about Donald Trump, but basically about Chris Hedges and what is called the ultimate takedown of Donald Trump. Without further ado, the next 20 minutes will be this address by Chris Hedges.
See you back here after this. Move the cursor all the way to the right. Get rid of that.
Anta
stuff on the
Cecilia
screen.
Point, Lieutenant Rock Pamasquiam, meets up Quapquilam, Natsamat. I usually don't pay attention to colonial politics, but there's some very outrageous things taking place. When people come to our territories, we ask them if they're coming with a good heart and a good mind. This song I sang coming up the aisle is one of our paddle songs. It comes from a relative of ours named Rose Green from the Stalo Nation. So we would get in our canoes and go out and greet who was coming in. And we went out and greeted every boat, no matter where they were coming from. This land is not just for the English and just for the French. It's only 150 years old, this thing called Canada. It's not for anyone to say who can be here and who can't be here. This is how we coexist. So many of us I see in this audience, we've been here on the front lines fighting for our environment and this beautiful place. And now you have to fight for the children. So that's the message my ancestors are giving you today. We'll see you.
Chris Hedges speaks of the best of his prize-winning journalism as amplifying the voices of the dispossessed. We see that when he speaks at Standing Rock, at the Women's March, standing beside Chelsea Manning and the whistleblowers, when he stands with the leaders of Black Lives Matter. But Chris is also a daring intellectual. His interviews with activists and the thinkers of our day may reinforce his opinions, as does his practice as a reader, but the analysis is his own. And those of us who spend our lives challenging authority have learned to use his voice to reinforce our research with his, to strengthen our personal integrity with his, to cherish and emulate his determination to learn and to speak truthfully. His address tonight is likely to once again stiffen our spines.
The final stages of capitalism, Karl Marx predicted, would be marked by global capital being unable to expand and generate profits at former levels. Capitalists would begin to consume the government, along with the physical and social structures that sustain them. Democracy, social welfare, electoral participation, the common good, investment in public transportation, roads, bridges, utilities, industry, education, healthcare, and the protection of the ecosystem would be sacrificed to feed the mania for short-term profit. These assaults would destroy the host. And this is the stage of late capitalism that Donald Trump represents. Trump and his reactionary capitalists who have seized 34 of 50 governorships and 68 of 99 state legislatures, 49 of which are bicameral, plan to oversee the final campaign of corporate pillaging of America and the rest of the planet. It will be crass and brazen, as crass and brazen as the fleecing of the desperate people hoping for a miracle in the face of dead-end jobs and ruinous personal debt who patronized Trump's casinos and the casinos springing up across the United States and Canada, or who shelled out thousands of dollars for the sham of Trump University. He is unleashing a kleptocracy. The word comes from the Greek, klepto, meaning thieves, and kratos, meaning rule, so it is literally rule by thieves. One that will rival the kleptocracies carried out by Suharto in Indonesia and Marcos in the Philippines. It is not that Trump and his family will use the influence of government to increase their wealth, although this will certainly take place on a massive scale. It is that hundreds of billions of federal dollars will be diverted into the hands of cronies, sleazy bankers, unethical financial firms, and scabrous hedge fund managers. Everything will, to use a business term, be harvested. The decaying pillars of the liberal state in America will be obliterated. At the same time, the militarization of America is being accelerated. The defense budget will be increased by 10%, or $54 billion, although the United States already spends more than the defense budgets of the next 7 countries combined. The paramilitary forces of immigration and customs enforcement, which will soon hire 10,000 more agents, and the Border Patrol, which will hire 5,000 more agents, along with Homeland Security, have all deputized local and state police to function as their auxiliaries. They will be flooded with cast-off military-issue equipment. These paramilitary forces will not disband once they have finished terrorizing and deporting some of the 11 million undocumented workers in the United States. They will turn on their next victims, Muslims, African Americans, Asians, dissidents. This militarization of society is designed to carry out the race war that Trump and those around him see as inevitable at home and abroad. In poor communities of color, this race war has already begun. Racial profiling, random police stops, raids at homes and businesses, people of color pulled from vehicles at checkpoints, seizures of individuals with no criminal records or who never committed a serious crime, imprisonment without trial, expedited deportation hearings and removal proceedings that violate the most basic human rights. The arrest of a beneficiary of the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, or DACA program, Daniel Ramirez Medina, 23, who along with the program's other 750,000 successful applicants had revealed all personal history to the government in applying for DACA status. Parents separated, perhaps forever, from their children. The hunted going underground, the end of the rule of law, the abandonment of the common good, the obliteration of a social state in which institutions and assistance programs, from public education to social security and welfare, make justice, equality, and dignity possible. White Europeans who are undocumented are not being targeted. The executive orders of Trump are directed against people of color. They begin from the premise that white Americans are the true victims of neoliberalism, deindustrialization, and falling living standards. The Trump orders are written not to make America great again, but to make America white. They are an updated version of the Nazis' Nuremberg laws, the Jim Crow laws, the Chinese Exclusion Act, and the Naturalization Act of 1870. They are intended to institutionalize an overt racial hierarchy in the United States, one already far advanced in the miniature police states where people of color live in marginal communities. In these impoverished enclaves, there is no right to trial or due process. Militarized police kill with impunity, and the courts lock people away, often for life. Rights are treated as privileges that can instantly be revoked. The poor, especially poor people of color, are exempted from moral consideration. They are attacked as impediments to social cohesion. And these impediments must be eliminated. Jews, their community centers enduring threats of violence, and their graveyards desecrated, will also be persecuted. American fascism is rapidly being cemented into place by uniformed and heavily armed paramilitary goons, clutching the flag and the cross, and reciting the Pledge of Allegiance and the Lord's Prayer. Little or no progress.
This address by Chris Hedges took place, I believe, in Canada. Paul Stephen Stone mentioned when we were discussing
Aspect
this.
of rescue from
Paul Stephen Stone mentioned when we were discussing, I'm sorry for the error on my part there, that Chris Hedges is a pastor and that he studied at the Harvard Divinity School. This is not a politician speaking, this is not a journalist. The individual speaking here, Chris Hedges, is speaking as someone who is eminently qualified to analyze ethically, morally, and consequentially for his parish, his parishioners, what a text means. And I see this, and this is a question I'll be putting to you, Paul.
Mm-hmm.
I see this as a critique that is pointed at the Christian ideal of neighborhood, of civil society, of religious freedom, of an ethical life, which is being challenged, and as Hedges mentions here, is being attacked, the very basis of social and ethical life in the United States, challenged by the restructuring of the society in a model which Hedges says is fascism in America. Paul, would you be willing to critique that?
Okay. There was a lot in that sentence.
I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. The one thing that came to my mind as you were talking about fascism is that fascism creeps. So it's kind of, I've been going through this experience lately where I kind of ask myself, how did I get to be 70? How did I get to be this old? How did I get to be in a situation where I'm depending on Social Security? And age creeps. Things creep. It's just so the way. But with fascism, I think it would be the same thing where suddenly you'll wake up one day and you're in a state. Listen to him describe all this militarization. It's just really frightening. That's what Jefferson is all about. Jefferson, Missouri. That police force in Jefferson was basically an income generator, and they were preying on the black population. And if you got a ticket for something and you were a little late in responding to it, they just kept jacking up the fees, and they were absolutely vicious. They were predatory on the black population, and they still are. The federal government did a study of them, and the town relies on them to raise tax revenues or income. So we're in a state right now that is turning fascism, is creeping towards fascism. If you look at the way that the government allowed the Standing Rock tribe to be treated, that was totally fascist. And if you look at the fact that the newspapers basically ignored it, that would have been the day that they set those attack dogs loose on the protesters. 10, 20 years ago, that would have been all over the world. It wouldn't have been hidden. You had to go online to find it. Dogs being, attacking peaceful protesters, and their protest was absolutely valiant, I thought, and which I think really scared, the powers that be. I don't know why the governor of North Dakota feels that he had to be so fucking brutal, but if that jerk ever gets elected to office again, it'll be amazing. I mean, he basically put himself on the side of the devils. These people were just absolutely horrible. So the militarization, and the militarization happened under Obama. There's a lot that happened under Obama. Obama gets a
Free pass.
free pass for so much, and he was absolutely, and he basically turned his back on Bernie having the election, stole from him the nomination, and he just was Mr. Cool. Okay, vote for me, I'm cool. And he did some good things. He got a lot of things.
Obamacare.
Yeah, well, Obamacare was pretty early, and he made I think a colossal mistake by not fighting to have the thing be single payer. If that was a single payer system, we would all have health care coverage right now, and we would all feel comfortable. We wouldn't be worried about those fuckers taking it away, which they're going to do. They're going to find a way to take Obamacare away, and they couldn't get it passed because the people who wanted it to be more severe.
Even more severe than what it was.
Yeah. So they're the ones whose votes are being kind of
restructured, channeled,
but
made acceptable.
Yeah, they're basically kissing the ground these people were walking on. So the reality is we're having all this stuff ebb away from us. Donald Trump doesn't care a bit about how this looks because he's somehow, when he once said that he could go to Times Square and shoot somebody and nobody would arrest him or he wouldn't lose any votes, he's probably right. People like the fact that he's outrageous. He's kind of like a Don Rickles without the laughs.
Excuse me. This is from Paul Stevens Stone's In My Childhood. Don Rickles' character.
He just died. Don Rickles. He's still around.
Well,
he's been around.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, he died. I think he was close to 90. They know Don Rickles.
I do.
They do too. You know Don Rickles, correct, folks?
Yes,
Hopefully.
yes we do. Yes we do.
But he attacked everybody. He made, he was just really kind of fun. You took it in your stride. I mean, Trump attacks everybody, and some people buy into it. These people obviously deserve to be attacked if the president is attacking them. And he's lazy. How many weekends does he fly away and spends more time in Florida than he does in Washington? Actually, that would be okay because he could do less damage theoretically.
So,
did I answer your question?
It does, exactly. The idea that fascism is a creeping phenomena, I agree with completely. The study of European fascism shows that to be the case, but what's unusual here in the United States is the groundwork has been laid over 50 years to enable the position we have now. Actually, when Hedges states that there are the implementation of the incarceration of the Japanese without any type of...
You mean American Japanese?
The American Japanese.
During World War II, yes.
Exactly.
Yes,
And
internment.
the internment, I don't know how many there were, 200,000 or so?
Something like that, yes.
And they took them, the law was passed, they were taken out of their homes were sold or
Yeah, they basically stole their property.
they stole their property, they stole everything from the Japanese, completely without rights. There was no right to do that except the passing of a law. And for this precedent is still in place, and I feel that the militarization, as you mentioned, the militarization of America has been going on systematically, and that is precisely what the violence of this implementation, the arrest of tens of thousands of individuals, undocumented individuals in the United States, their deportation will be accelerated, the hiring of thousands of individuals. This is a phenomena that has been geared to and built up due to the racist, incredibly racist structure in the United States, a deeply seated racist position entrenched over generations that is now rearing its head.
You know, the one thing that I think goes unnoticed is that the Black Lives Matter was a response to a systematic situation. Blacks were getting shot for no good reason by police officers, sometimes black police officers. But basically it was a reaction to something that already existed. Now the militarization and the coming back on top and being angry at Black Lives Matter people and basically trying to undermine and delegitimize Black Lives Matter, that's because that's now a reality. One reality creates another, which creates another. And unless somebody says, you know, when you have too much money, it's a dangerous thing. Buying all these tanks for the police forces does nothing good for this society. It actually spreads the distancing of the police from the population. It enhances the ability of the police not to get dirty when they you know, run roughshod over their constituents. There's nothing good that comes out of this money, and now you're going to give military budget, an already bloated military budget, 10 to 15% more money. I mean, what the fuck is the point unless we're going to go kill people? It's almost like you've got to justify getting all that extra money. You're going to have to go out and kill 10% more people. And we're just not saying, let's get more for our money. Let's reduce the amount of money and slowly reduce the pressure to, you know, use weapons. Somebody recently talked about the noticeable absence of a peace movement or people talking about peace. It is true, and we've been engaged in war for years and years, unstopping, and there's still no peace movement. And it seems kind of crazy. And I suspect that part of that has to do with the fact that they can't get any traction in mainstream media because that's going against their corporate masters. But still, you would think that at some point somebody's going to start to say, yeah, enough, which is what Bernie said, but he was saying it in terms of our spending priorities and our basically setting up a tax structure that keeps the rich as ever and the poor down and downtrodden as much as ever.
The inequity, I think it's excellent, Paul, that you're mentioning the inequities. Sanders was important, I believe, because he addressed the inequities, the incredible inequities of our tax system. And you've mentioned that. I believe that is a central point. It's a central point that creates in the poor and working poor, the blue collar, this resentment against Washington. I believe that Trump voters, for the most part, see the resentment against Washington, against Congress, for creating these inequities. And Trump saying, perhaps you could critique this, Trump saying he's going to make America great again, won over a large portion of these blue collar workers who momentarily do not have any justification for believing that Trump is actually going to follow through with this.
Mm-hmm. I think you put your finger right on the pulse of this thing. I think there's so much dissatisfaction out there with what the government has promised and what the government has delivered. There's such a disparity between one and the other. And the politicians are the ones that make the promises. Obama had lots of promises. Change. You know, where was real change? Where was real change?
There wasn't much.
There wasn't. I wish they could take that Nobel Peace Prize back because he did not deserve it. He became an agent of the
That's true.
deep state.
Of the industrial military.
Yes,
right?
yes. And his drones killed a lot of people who had no reason to be killed. So I think there's a lot that Obama has to answer for.
But don't you feel that Obama basically, as a black president, also contributed to this racism?
I think
in a very strange sort of way. He was so cool, so distanced, so unapproachable, apparently, but so he was cool, but not effective.
No, he wasn't effective. I think he was most afraid of being seen as an angry young black man. There's this stereotype about angry blacks, and so he would not raise his voice, and he was just, he needed to swing a heavier stick. He really did. He needed to make people who were giving his life, basically putting his feet over the fire, he needed to give them some political price to pay. And I don't think he did that either. I don't think he had the interest in doing it. And then Hillary, I have no idea how he could have ever justified or rationalized all that he sacrificed for Hillary. She
You
made
mean
his...
making Secretary of State, for instance?
Yeah, and how she behaved in that position. He should be embarrassed that all that money was wasted and all those guns sent to people that aren't doing good things with guns, and they all donated to the Clinton Foundation. Pay for play is a crime. Proving it is difficult, but pay for play, and it was written all over, her footprints. You could see her going from the bank to a State Street, to a State Department customer, to a bank, to a State Department, send Bill Clinton out to spend $500,000 of the Russians' money to have him talk because he's such a great raconteur.
I'm embarrassed having laughed at that. I believe exactly that you put exactly how the system worked, exactly how the Clintons have worked for generations.
They're the worst examples of politicians that are just aggrandizing and enriching. But the issue now is, what do we do with this joker that we got in charge of the government? And especially since we can't trust the mainstream media or the intelligence services to be honest about what's happening. So we're in a quandary.
So thank you for that, Paul. Let me help move on to. I received this, the official Democratic. For those of you who can't read this, this is the official 2017 Democratic Party survey, and it says here, Section 1, your personal priorities. Paul, can I read you this, please?
Sure.
Which domestic issues are most important to you? Ensuring that our democracy is free from Russian interference?
I wake up nights about that one. I wish our democracy was free of, insider interference. I mean, that's what happened. And the question I have is did Trump steal more votes than Hillary did? And did Hillary steal them from Jill Stein? Because Jill Stein, I think, absolutely had her, her votes rapaciously taken from her, I think.
The question was, in an interview that I saw, Bernie Sanders was being interviewed by three CNN, I believe it was CNN, journalists, and was asked the question, the voters did not come out for you in the election. And the question, of course, under that is he wasn't actually in the primaries and in the caucuses. They came out for Sanders very strongly, but then they weren't actually counted.
So they said that to him?
They said that, meaning where were the votes that the Democrats, he was running as a Democrat against Clinton,
Right.
Where were the votes for Clinton when she won the nomination? Where were those people supporting you? Well, they didn't vote for Clinton, did they? They probably voted for Stein. I don't think most of the millennials voted for Trump. I don't think that's the case.
I think a lot of people stayed home. When you get two really repugnant choices, repulsive choices, I mean, Hillary, to me, I couldn't imagine voting for Hillary. I was so angry at what she allowed to have happen. If she didn't instigate the theft of the nomination, she allowed it to have happen under her name. And you know, that Democratic survey, they would have made it ecologically sounder if they made it of toilet paper.
Of course. So
Then it would have had some practical value. That's what I'm trying to say, folks. Give me another really good
is
domestic
which
priority.
domestic issues are most important to you? You have your choice here again. You can choose three of them. How about protecting Social Security and Medicare from privatization?
Absolutely, absolutely. The inference here is that everything that they mention is basically inculcated into the Republicans. The Republicans use the Russians. The Republicans are going to steal. Republicans, they may ultimately push back the years that you're eligible in Social Security. You know, the truth of the matter is that those Social Security should be increased, not decreased. I'm not sure that when it starts is the issue. I think the issue is whether or not it gives people enough to live on when they do get it. So I'm not particularly concerned about them starting it 2 years later if that's what they're going to do. I think, you know, they may pay a price for that anyway. But if they start to cut the benefits, then I've got a real problem, because it's just not realistic. It's becoming less and less of a safety net. It's got holes in it.
And I believe that's basically what Chris Hedges meant, the erosion of the social system that allows dignity, that allows equity. And
Yeah.
that's the point, the moral and ethical point that Hedges was making, and that he's entitled to make as a minister. And the critique, those of us who have watched the first part of this program recognize that the critique was stringent, to the point, and consequential, and not made from a politician or a journalist, but rather from...
Well, he is a journalist. They made the
course,
point that
yes.
he won the Pulitzer Prize. I
Sorry.
wasn't aware of it, but they
It's
made,
true, yes. I had forgotten that.
Yeah, but the thing that's valuable about Chris Hedges is that he's very capable. He can put thoughts into words. He can articulate the situation in ways that really make it clear what's happening. When he went through that litany of what Trump is doing now, it wasn't like he had to list all the actual things that are being done. You knew what they were. You just didn't see them in terms of the way he presented them. You know, we are increasing the racial divide. You know, the economic disparity. It's all being done there. There are thieves that are kleptocracy is a very interesting term, and that is what we have. And the thing is, you need people like Chris Hedges and you and myself to just at least wake people up and say there's a crime being committed, you're being treated horribly, because people have proven time and time again they will vote against their own best interests. They are so angry at government, they saw Donald Trump, I believe, as an agent of change. Because he was different, he sounded different, he would sound like a snake oil salesman, but he sounded different.
Completely different from every other politician in years, in generations.
I
perhaps.
remember in the debate, one of the Republican debates, where he talked about George Bush needlessly, creating war in Iraq. And he nailed Bush in a way that nobody would nail him otherwise because everybody's
No
yeah.
Democratic candidate either.
Helen Thomas is the only one that I ever heard nail Bush to, talked about him starting a needless war or something to that effect.
But I interrupted you in your
no.
critique of Trump during the election.
Well, no, my point is that people aren't so sophisticated. He's gone from being a populist to being a corporatist. All his policies benefit the corporate structure. They don't do a freaking thing for the poor jerk out in the street. And he still seems to be, taking the hits, but not particularly dangerously to his standing. People want to see upheaval now. People are so freaking angry at the state.
They want upheaval.
They want upheaval. They want somebody. They want the government to stop working the way it's been working because it hasn't been working the way they need it to work. I mean, it's getting harder and harder to have a decent savings, plan, or a retirement plan. It's just harder and harder. I would never have spent as much money building the house that we're building had I realized all the costs involved. Thankfully, I'm glad we did because I'm going to love living there, and if I don't have to sell it too soon because I'm broke, it'll be nice to live there. But it is getting harder and harder to survive, I have to say. And I worry about my children. We're leaving a mess for our kids. Anybody that tells you they don't believe in the science of climate warming, they should be run out of town. They should be tarred and feathered. You should not accept an excuse that somebody doesn't believe that when there are 97% of the scientists are telling you that we're killing the planet, when the weather patterns are consistently showing, very weird spikes, heat-wise and cold-wise and snow-wise, something's happening. The polar ice cap is melting so fast that you're going to have plenty of ice for your next cocktail, but you're not going to have any ice for the polar bears. It's all happening. And so for somebody to say they don't believe in the science, I say fine, don't believe in the science, but we're not talking about something that's as non-critical to survival as evolution.
Evolution, right.
Okay, I don't have to worry about the polar ice cap melting because people don't believe in evolution. But when you pretend that you don't believe in climate warming, you are telling the entire planet to go fuck itself. That's what you're doing. You're telling your children, your children's children, because you're saying, I found the reason for not voting to do anything, and you should be run out of town. You should be thrown out of office, run out of town.
Paul Stevenstone, thank you so much, Paul. That is exactly to the point.
Thank you.
The reality is, it makes no difference if politicians believe in science. The reality of gravity cannot be debated, and the reality of climate change is immediate. Every nation on this planet, every state in the United States has experienced radical changes in their environmental realities. Hurricanes in the panhandle of Florida, tornadoes in the panhandle of Florida, drastic hurricanes, heat waves, floods, droughts, in a unending, continuing spike from year to year of higher global temperatures.
But you don't have to convince anybody. The truth of the matter is there's enough information and evidence to make somebody say, okay, if that is true, we got to scramble and save our ass.
It's true.
It isn't like you can say, I don't believe it and I'm going to go back to bed. Because the reality is it's still happening and it's getting worse. You can't go back to bed. And you can't hide behind some bullshit soundbite that the Koch brothers paid to have developed for you. You need to deal with the reality that your planet may actually be at the end of its life if you don't do something.
And it's interesting that Chris Hedges did not mention global warming.
He hadn't gotten to it yet. He didn't mention it throughout the whole thing. Because what they're doing,
we saw the first 20 minutes.
What they're doing is they're just burning the planet up. They're going to bring coal back as much as they can. They're going to, a bunch of clowns. The Keystone Pipeline, which is supposedly a amplitude of increased carbon dioxide being released of significant, it's a major incremental increase. So that's going to be approved. The Indians in Standing Rock, if they haven't been shot yet, or they haven't been run out of town yet, they're going to have water with the oil running right under it. And we don't care. We don't really care.
The idea of us not caring, it definitely seems to be the case that that is the underpinning of why rural America, the America that is seen in hillbilly elegy, is completely on the side of Donald Trump, because, as you've mentioned, rural America is demanding change, is hungry for change, and disruption of a structure that they see in Washington that has led to their economic, social, and family decline over 30 years.
Yeah. They've seen all the factories abandoned. They've seen, probably the best product that you can get now in the hill country is meth. Methamphetamines.
Oh my God.
That's the only homegrown manufacturing position that you can get these days.
That's an interesting point, Paul. And that's basically how the incarceration of this vast number of blacks and people of color came about after Reagan's war on drugs.
When you don't have a job and you got hours to fill, it's just the same thing. When you have too much money, you get in trouble. When you have too much time, you get in trouble. It's very hard to keep people doing productive things when they don't have any work. And I'd get high on something if I had nothing else to do but sit around and wait for a government check to come in.
They have to feed their family. Everyone has to pay their bills. They have to pay rent. They have to pay for the car, put gas in it to be able to get to work, pay for the mortgage, pay for groceries, their college education of their children, or just to survive. And people are going to get funds to be able to meet these demands. If they don't have a job, they're going to find a way to get money. Mm-hmm. If they have to produce meth or whatever they have to produce, whatever they have to sell, they're going to get money to be able to live. It's right. Normal, and they're entitled to it. Are they not entitled?
Right. How could you possibly blame or incarcerate someone who steals or goes out as a streetwalker to feed his or her children? That's what they should do. If their parents, if they come to the very last option, then they're going to have to take it. They're the ones that got to feed those kids. I don't want to hear about somebody being arrested because they've smoked dope or they've done something just to basically keep sort of self-medicating is what it is. It's really sad. I do like the fact that Trump is going to stop the TPP and not do that. I don't believe that he's going to stay consistent on anything. I think that Trump can't be counted on to follow through on his word. So he stopped the TPP. Supposedly we're going to pull out of NAFTA. We'll see if that happens, and he'll renegotiate once we do. But I like the fact that, okay, you've seen your job go away. The carrier plant was going to move to Mexico. Fuck your job. They don't care about you. You're going to get 6 or 9 months of unemployment insurance. And then you're going to be faced with the question, what the hell do you do with yourself? What do you do with the rest of your life? If I wanted to find a job now, what do? I'm a Walmart greeter. There aren't that many jobs short of fast food places. And I can't stay on my feet all day, so I have to think about. I have to write a best-selling novel. If I write a novel.
By the way, Paul, you're working on that now.
I'm working on that, right? So please, if I put out another novel, buy it. This time, buy it. Whatever I did to make you not buy my last novel, I stopped doing it. So buy this one. But that's kind of like my hope for, and I know that it's almost impossible to make money writing novels. I've been there. So, Bible study. We'll see. But it's a tough time to, make a go of it in a lot of places in this country. And it's not because immigrants are taking your jobs. Immigrants are taking the jobs that you don't want. The truth of the matter is, it's just because people took the jobs to where they could pay the least to have them performed. I try not to buy, what's that manufacturer? Hanes. I try not to buy Hanes products.
Underwear and
Yes, because Hanes has this policy. They will open up a major mammoth manufacturing facility in Kuala Lumpur, China, somewhere where they can get it really cheap, the labor force really cheap. And 2 years later or 4 years later, they'll move again to a cheaper workforce.
their research and development is to find a cheaper place to produce.
And they consistently do it. So you're not
Well, they
gaining.
get all those tax benefits. They get the tax benefits to be able to build the factory and then recruit the force, the workforce, and then move somewhere else when it's better. And repeat this as a tactic,
Yeah. So I don't buy Hanes if I can avoid it, especially since I can get Champion. I like Champion underwear. Champion's a good brand.
That's a recommendation. Thanks.
Yeah, I just discovered these boxer briefs. We'd have part of your legs, a little bit of thigh action covered. It's very comfortable, very comfortable. I recommend them highly.
That's a recommendation that we can all follow. Paul, I'm going to go out and spend some money on that. Thank
Unsolicited.
you so much. But unfortunately, it's not really, I'm really not allowed to do that on Cambridge Community Television. It's a community. So I'm not supporting basically this statement, although I appreciate the critique. Ladies and gentlemen, the fact that Paul Stephen Stone and I are making light of the fact of the production or making a joke or attempting to make jokes is not different from the reality TV shows, the late night comic shows that take place. But I feel, Paul, that it's not really possible to be pointed. I think only political humor is a critique that's accepted by the American public.
Well, humor will, basically make up for a lot of sins. And this stuff is very unpleasant. Talking about people struggling to survive, it's very unpleasant. So, as anybody who's trying to push the truth and advocate for the truth and advocate for just basic humane conditions for people, right now there's a boycott of Wendy's, if you're familiar with that.
I'm not.
Well, people in my church went down to Florida to work with the farm workers. And they've started, down there, they started a boycott against Wendy's because Wendy's won't sign fair, I don't know if it's salary or...
Labor laws.
Yeah, they won't treat people who have, these workers picking up tomatoes for them, they won't treat them fairly, supposedly. So, I don't know the truth of that. I don't eat at Wendy's anyway, but I think it's important to give support. Cesar Chavez was just an incredible human being.
It's true.
He had a lot of charisma, and then I wonder about his death. He died so conveniently for the growers, but he was very.
Tell me something about your church, Paul.
Old Ship Church in Hingham. It's a UU church, Unitarian Universalist. The building that we've been in since 1681.
Wow.
It's the oldest continuously used house of worship in the country, I think.
Congratulations.
The congregation itself is from 1635. People that came over from
By the
England.
way, for those of us who don't recognize this, in 1620, I believe,
Pilgrims.
the Pilgrims landed
Yeah.
on the Mayflower, right?
Yeah.
1620, so 18 years later they had founded this church?
Well,
About?
A Massachusetts colony grew up pretty quickly. 35. Scituate had an early group of people from England. They were called the Men of Kent. And they basically kind of spread out throughout the South Shore. I don't know the Hingham story, to be quite honest with you. There's a sister city in England called Hingham that town is connected to.
I've led you away from basically.
So the church, though, it's very progressive in its thinking. The minister is just an amazing fellow. I went to this church when I was in Cambridge, and that's in Hingham.
That's a long drive.
It's not really. On a Sunday morning, going there, it was like a 35-minute drive, and maybe an hour coming back because traffic usually it's terrible. But now it's a 45-minute drive back and forth from Plymouth to Hingham. But there's a social justice group that's working on education issues at the church. Homelessness is, I think, our next big issue that the church is taking on. And, it's a very public-spirited, humane organization. We have food collections and things of that sort for the poor. Every year now we have a Friends of the South Shore Homeless Christmas dinner that we host, which is kind of a nice thing. It's very, very rewarding to put some energy out in that direction. And our minister, Ken Reed Brown, is just, he walks the walk, he talks the talk. He's just a real amazing individual who can put together a great sermon every week. Takes a few weeks off here and there during the season, but he's great.
Unitarian Universalist.
Yes, old ship, because it's an old building, it's an old meeting house, and it has this vaulted ceiling with these giant timbers that look like ship timbers. That's why I got the name Old Ship, supposedly. So.
Yeah. Moral leadership, moral and ethical leadership is something the United States prides itself in, being manifest destiny, the concept that America is different from any other nation. America is the beacon on the hill or something of that kind.
Right.
So, and because they're different from every other nation before, they have the right to tell other nations how to behave. This manifest destiny idea is carried on at different levels, perhaps, and most of it is just jingoism. Giving the American military or American politicians the right to go to war with other nations. It's the basis for the Bush idea that after the attack on the World Trade Center, that Afghanistan could be attacked, and then Saddam Hussein, two nations basically that may not have had anything whatsoever to do with the attack other than the fact or the idea that Osama bin Laden was holed up in the mountains of Afghanistan.
Well, Afghanistan was a safe harbor for bin Laden and his gang. I have no trouble with the logic going into Afghanistan. I have nothing but trouble with the idea that you leave the job unfinished to start another war in another country that you can't handle, you don't have enough troops for, and you don't even understand. I mean, if you look back at what we did in Iraq, everything we did is ignorant. We're just absolutely acting out of ignorance. And that guy Bremer, who we brought over, was the biggest disaster we could have possibly put in place. A couple of his edicts absolutely destroyed any effort to rebuild Iraq. When he disbanded the army, when he de-Baathified the country, all that stuff. The consequences were ridiculous, and he basically fired all the police. So he had nobody to keep law and order. Nobody was earning a living. They were all basically... We actually had an incredible recipe for disaster. It's like we planned, how do we create a disaster in this
that
country?
Would go on for 25 years,
Yeah.
that will go on and consume trillions of dollars. Literally, the amount of money, Paul, that we have spent in Iraq and Afghanistan together, we could complete the entire infrastructure of the United States
Right.
several times.
Probably send all our children to college and
Tuition
grad school.
free.
So I want to, in the time we have left, I want to mention something. There's a movie that I saw the other day called The Peacemaker. And it's a documentary about a fellow named Porrig O'Malley who lives in Cambridge and was owner of the Plough and Stars for years. And this fellow has taken it on himself. He's an admitted alcoholic, was in Alcoholics Anonymous and goes to meetings 2 or 3 times a week. But he saw the whole strategy in Alcoholics Anonymous, basically alcoholics creating a foundation, a grounding for other alcoholics to basically recover themselves. And he did the same thing with what he called, I can't remember the term, but for cities that were in turmoil. Like,
wow.
Like Northern Belfast, like Northern Ireland, Belfast and Northern Ireland. And he has these conferences every year, pardon me folks, he has conferences every year where he takes people from these divided cities, Jerusalem, well obviously South Africa's already healing, and Ireland's healing, and he's done that with the Iraqis. The Helsinki Accords were, I guess, partly his doing, which are the Iraqi major players, I guess. But the reality is he's just working tirelessly to make a better world, a more peaceful world. And I just want to give a little bit of notice to the movie The Peacemaker, and the filmographers, videographers, or documentary makers were Central Square Film.
Paul Stephen Stone, by the way, has a movement for his for Syracuse University called the Orange Shield. So it's Paul Stephen Stone who advocates for peace and social justice.
Now I know why you talk about Syracuse. The Orange Shield, yes. But I never did it because of the orange.
We've got 6 seconds.
Yeah, it's an anti-bullying program. Look it up. Orange Shield.
Thanks so much.